breaking news from the Middle East. The Israeli foreign minister says the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar has been killed. Sinwar was one of 3 people killed during an Israeli military operation in southern Gaza. Israeli officials examined dental images and DNA evidence to confirm Sinwar's identity and therefore his death. Sinwar led Hamas since the summer and has been one of the key figures within the terror organization's political and military clashes over the years with Israel. He is also significantly the alleged mastermind behind the October 7th, 2023 attack in Israel, which killed roughly 1,200 people. Since then, Israel has engaged in a devastating ground military operation in Gaza to destroy Hamas and one of its other missions to, quote, find and kill Sinwar. CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio joins us from Tel Aviv. Ramy, this has been talked about on social media for the better part of 2 hours. We now, through the foreign minister, have what constitutes confirmation. What else can you tell us?
Yes, that's right, Major. The foreign minister, Israel Katz, saying that this is a great military and moral achievement here, also pushing back that this is everything that they wanted against the evil axis led by Iran. And images of Sinwar first started circulating around 3 p.m. local time here. It's now been about 5 hours or so since then. Images of what appeared then to be a dead man curled up in a pile of rubble and with a deep gash across the top of his head. The IDF then released a statement about an hour later saying that during operations in the Gaza Strip, they killed 3 terrorists, and then they started checking the possibility that one of them was, in fact, Yahya Sinwar. Tests were run on his DNA, his fingerprints were checked, because Israel has those records from the time Sinwar spent in prison. And now, interestingly, local Israeli media are reporting that Sinwar's killing may actually have been by chance, that Israeli troops were clearing the area, saw these 3 people, fired on them, and only when they went to inspect their bodies did they think that one of the men looked like Yahya Sinwar, and now we get that confirmation that it was.
And Ramy, in the main, Sinwar has been not that visible above ground in Gaza, as I understand it, and that has been one of the complicating factors for the Israeli Defense Forces as it has carried out its campaign in Gaza. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. It has been very difficult to try to track down where he is, of course, and we're also trying to hear what Hamas has been trying to have in a kind of reaction. Hamas so far hasn't issued a statement so far, but looking ahead, the first question for that group is who will lead Hamas now? Israel killed Hamas's commander, we know, Mohammed Deif, back in July. He was called the Osama bin Laden of Gaza and another mastermind of the October 7th attacks. We know that Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran in July, the head of Hamas's political wing. Other deputies have been killed, along with thousands of Hamas fighters. So if and when a new leader is decided, Major, the question then could be whether to try to strike Israel here in retaliation. We know Hamas has been degraded over the past year, but we know it hasn't been destroyed. Or perhaps could the death of Sinwar bring Hamas to its knees in some way and then back to the negotiating table for talks? But right now, we might expect that Hamas in Gaza, and as we know they exist across the Middle East, is reeling and is in disarray.
Ramy, please stand by. I want to bring in our Face the Nation moderator and our chief foreign affairs correspondent, Margaret Brennan. Margaret, what are you hearing from your sources, and can you, for the American audience, contextualize the importance of this moment?
Major, U.S. sources, Israeli sources tell us this is a game changer. We now have from Israel Defense Forces, from top Israeli officials, the confirmation that Hamas commander Yahya Sinwar, he was the architect of the October 7th attack on Israel, is confirmed dead. So to give Americans a sense of how significant this is to the Israelis, this is their Osama bin Laden. And on Wednesday, the Israel Defense Forces killed Sinwar and 2 other men in a raid in southern Gaza. An Israeli security official told CBS today the soldiers happened to notice that one of the men just looked like Sinwar. In other words, they got lucky here. And because this wasn't a combat engagement, not a bomb drop from the sky, a combat engagement, they were able to take DNA samples from the remains back to Israel and to confirm the death. They now have multiple sources of confirmation in the field and back in Israel, that the DNA matches that of Yahya Sinwar. So from this morning, from dawn, I am told by U.S. officials, they have been working to try to make this determination. We know President Biden is traveling outside of the country, but throughout the morning, he has been regularly updated aboard Air Force One. And at this point, all my reporting is that there was no U.S. role in the specific attack that killed Sinwar Wednesday. But for more than a year now, U.S. intelligence and Joint Special Operations Command have been side by side, hand in glove with the Israelis, trying to help them through intelligence sharing hunt down the leaders of Hamas, including Yahya Sinwar. The top echelon of leadership has now been killed. Sinwar was the mastermind responsible for that surprise attack October 7th, an insurgent attack against one of the most sophisticated military forces in the world. It killed 1,200 Israelis. His stated intent was to help Palestinians to shake off through force Israeli rule. But his actions also led to a war between Hamas and Israel that has so far killed 42,000 of his fellow Palestinians, according to the Gaza Ministry of Health. The majority of them, Major, women and children. So this death is potentially a game changer for the conflict, but there are a lot of unknowns. Rami mentioned some of them. What happens to the roughly 100 remaining hostages Hamas took last year? 4 of them, U.S. citizens. Another wild card. Who steps in to take over Hamas? Will they be more willing to negotiate a deal with Israel? How does this play out, by the way, in Tehran? Remember, this conflict has spread through the region over the past year, and we have been on standby waiting for an expected Israeli retaliatory attack on Iran because of other assassinations the Israelis carried out against Hezbollah leaders, another militia, that one based in Lebanon. In Gaza, Sinwar, 62 years old, Major, he spent nearly 2 decades in Israeli custody because of his role in murdering Israelis and Palestinians. He was freed by then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu back in 2011 from prison as part of a hostage deal. There is some historic irony here that we will shortly hear from the Israeli Prime Minister once again, Benjamin Netanyahu, that Yahya Sinwar, the man responsible for killing the most number of Jews since the Holocaust during the reign of Prime Minister Netanyahu, is now confirmed to be dead at the hands of Israel Defense Forces.
Margaret, I want to talk to you about what we can see on screen now, which are protests for those supporting the return of the remaining hostages to Israel. This is spontaneous reaction within Israel to the announced death of Yahya Sinwar. And as you mentioned, 90 or so hostages believed to still be alive. Do you believe, and do you have any source information this hour that suggests the death of Sinwar might in any way, since he was the principal interlocutor with not only Israel, but Egypt, the United States, and others involved in these ongoing negotiations, that there might be a better prospect of winning the return of those hostages in the aftermath of his death?
Major, I put that question earlier today to a number of U.S. officials who say a lot depends on the choices being made in the coming days by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I spoke to some Israeli sources as well who do see this as a moment of potential opportunity. The Prime Minister could look at this and say that Israel has taken out the top echelon of Hamas leadership. They could use that to declare victory and to wind down the conflict in Gaza. Do they do that in a way that unlocks a deal with Hamas for the release of hostages? That's the broader question. And for the families of those, like the protesters that you see out there in the street, their number one priority is bringing home those being held against their will who have been there for more than a year now.
Margaret Brennan, thank you very much. I want to bring in CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata, who joins us from the Pentagon. There have been enormous, or certainly significant, measurable deployments of U.S. military personnel in the last year after the October 7th attack. Charlie, what are you hearing there at the Pentagon?
Yeah, well, Major, just like everybody else, we've been waiting all day. We heard the news this morning. We've been trying to scramble for confirmation. This will potentially impact U.S. forces in the area. There are 40,000 U.S. forces there. There's a carrier strike group in the region, several destroyers. development just this week. There's been a battery, a THAAD battery, a missile battery, which is to help out Israeli air defenses. That's the first time we've seen U.S. troops in a so-called combat role inside Israel itself, manning that missile battery. So the United States is already forward postured and connected to this, because all roads lead back to Iran. Overnight, the defense secretary announced a strike against Houthi targets in Yemen. That is fairly routine. What isn't routine was the use of B-2 stealth bombers, long range, able to carry heavy ordnance. And in his words, it's a unique demonstration to target facilities that our adversaries want to keep underground, no matter how deeply buried underground, hardened, or fortified, and hit 5 underground targets. So that's not just a message to the Houthis saying, we can reach you, we've got the reach, and we've got the weapons to do it, but also a side message to Iran. So they are already forward postured. Certainly there'll be a raise of the alert because of what has happened, this very significant killing of Sinwar and the repercussions that that's going to have. But they were already ready. Again, as Margaret had said, what we're waiting for here is Israel's retaliation for Iran's bombardment on October 1st. That would come first, and then we wait to see what Iran does to reply.
The world awaits. Charlie D'Agata at the Pentagon, thank you very much. To summarize our breaking news from the Middle East, Israel's foreign minister says Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar is dead, killed during an Israeli military operation in southern Gaza. Our coverage of this breaking news will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and tonight, of course, on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Good day.
You are listening to a CBS News breaking news update. We are back here with CBS News 24/7, monitoring all of our feeds internationally and talking to our correspondents. Israel's foreign minister says that top Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar was killed by Israeli forces in Gaza. He has been described as, quote, the mastermind behind these brutal attacks on October 7th. The IDF reports that 3 terrorists were killed during what they call a routine operation in the Gaza Strip. This information coming down just as we reported it to you live. Senior Vice President and Middle East Program Director for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, John Alterman, joining us now. Thank you so much for being here on this critical day with this latest information. Where do we begin? Why don't you talk about the significance of this confirmation of his death?
It is a really big deal. I think one of the big questions is, in the absence of him, who is going to make a deal on behalf of Hamas? A lot of the military leadership has been killed, the political leadership with the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in July means it's not really clear who can act for Hamas, but I think we are in a totally different part of this conflict. In my judgment, Yahya Sinwar was never going to make a deal to stop this fighting. Now we have the prospect. But one of the other questions very important about the hostages is who actually controls all the hostages. I don't think Hamas has all of them. And whether this new arrangement means some hostages can be released, some hostages are being held by other militant groups that aren't going to trust the new Hamas leadership. We are going to be in a very messy phase, but it also seems to me clear we're entering a different phase, and a phase where we can begin to see an end to military operations in the Gaza Strip, because the Netanyahu government can say, look, we got the biggest target we were going after.
Yeah, as it's been called a game changer, certainly our hearts going out to the families of those hostages, just waiting for word to see what may transpire next and who possibly may be the next leader. But I'm curious, would this be enough for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to announce a ceasefire?
Well, not by itself. But again, my assessment was Sinwar never was going to agree to a ceasefire with the Israelis. His determination is he was going to go down fighting. He has gone down fighting. Who is going to lead Hamas at this point? Who will make what kind of deal? How much control they'll have? What kinds of factions will agree? What won't agree? We're into a very messy phase of this. but it is the beginning of a set of opportunities to get out of this, and particularly from the point of view of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was accused by many on the right in Israel as well as the left of having been responsible for the October 7th massacres by his wrong approach to treating Hamas in Gaza. This gives him a scalp. It gives him a sign of victory. It gives him a sign of accomplishment, that we persevered for more than a year, and now we killed the mastermind behind this, and now we can start thinking about what the next phase is. Notably, Israel hasn't really talked a lot about what the next phase in Gaza is. Now Israel has to talk about the next phase, but it will be a phase that won't be led by Yahya Sinwar, which I think from the point of view of many Israelis is a necessity.
Obviously, this news coming and confirmation coming in fast and swift, and we do have that final confirmation from the DNA declaring that he has in fact been killed. I'm just curious, when you call it messy, what in fact does that mean, and how fast do things move in a situation like this?
Well, you have a terrorist group that is very concerned with the possibility that Israel is monitoring all of its communications. So communication is hard. It's hard to figure out who's on top, who's not on top. One of the things we see with all kinds of terrorist groups is when they decide to stop fighting, there are people who say, no, I'm going to keep fighting. We saw this with the Irish Republican Army and the real IRA that decided to keep fighting. So one of the challenges that Israel is going to have is there will be groups of Hamas fighters who are going to say, okay, let's figure a way out of this, and other groups of Hamas fighters who said, no, now we're going to have to double down. And of course, there are other militant groups within Gaza, including the Islamic Jihad and others, and how you create a new security environment and how you move to a post-conflict situation when you don't have a leader who can give credibility to a truce or whatever you're going to call it. And because they can't talk easily with one another, there could be a lot of messiness for many weeks to come.
All right. Appreciate your insight, and certainly developments as we speak by the minute. So we'll stand by for more information from our virtual feeds. Appreciate your insight. Thank you so much. We are certainly waiting for the State Department to give a briefing on what happened in the Middle East. When spokesperson Matthew Miller takes the mic, we're going to bring that to you live. You're watching CBS News 24/7. We'll be right back.
Come on, Julia. Oh, no. I will if you will. You go, gal. That's right.
Let me see if you can find me.
I want to make sure that my voice is heard, but also that I lift up other voices.
You can't write a better script. Yeah, boy!
It's gonna be a ride.
We'll see you 7 o'clock sharp.
How fast do you think you were going? 195 miles an hour. This is incredible.
How close did you actually come to being killed?
That close.
Is this brain surgery without a knife?
It is.
What risk do these children pose to Russia?
I'm not sure the world is prepared for this change.
Definitely not.
Who's the best coach in college football today?
Let me see a mirror.
It's time for the CBS News original, 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
I'm open to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
I'm a voracious consumer of information and constantly curious. I want to know the basic facts of every issue and to press into the heart of the matter. Information is the currency of democracy, and that's what we bring to the table every Sunday.
When you need your sports news all the time,
We've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you.
big news coming out of the NFL. A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
With highlights.
What a finish at the final round of play.
And in-depth analysis.
Can they three-peat? Tony Romo joins the conversation.
What can you say about this game?
When you need your sports in a snap.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
Find it on CBS Sports HQ. Streaming free anywhere you are.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
You're watching CBS News 24/7. We want to get back to the breaking news out of the Middle East. Israel's foreign minister says that Hamas's top leader, Yahya Sinwar, was killed by Israeli forces in Gaza. He has been described as, quote, the mastermind behind the brutal attacks on October 7th. The IDF reports that 3 terrorists were killed during what they call a routine operation in the Gaza Strip. President Biden has been briefed on the situation unfolding in the Middle East while on his way to Germany. President Biden will address the bloodshed in Israel and the steps to finding a diplomatic solution during his trip abroad. Now, CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman joins us live from Berlin with the latest developments on the White House's response to the death of Yahya Sinwar. Thank you for joining us on this critical day.
Hey there, Juliet. Good to be with you. President Biden is on his way to Berlin, Germany. As you mentioned, he'll touch down in about 3 hours or so. But we are hearing from a national security spokesperson that he was briefed this morning on the situation and that the United States White House officials remain in touch with their Israeli counterparts. It's also important to note that the president oftentimes travels with his national security team. He has Secretary of State Antony Blinken on board Air Force One, as well as NSC advisor Jake Sullivan aboard the plane as well. So they likely will brief him on the situation. And we do anticipate some type of a statement coming from the president. No word yet from the White House about official confirmation. But typically in these types of situations, the president will put out a paper statement and he'll be able to get in front of those cameras as soon as he lands here in Germany in just a number of hours, Juliet.
And Willie, let's talk about his trip. First and foremost, why he was there in the first place to talk to European leaders, probably his last trip as president. Can you address that?
Yeah, that's right. This is perhaps the president's last trip to Europe. He'll meet with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to talk about the partnership between the United States and Germany, the economic ties, increased people-to-people ties. On top of that, he'll hold a meeting tomorrow with the leaders of France, the UK, and Germany to talk about the situation in supporting Ukraine, continuing that support. And one of the key things that will likely be a topic of conversation is a $50 billion loan that would essentially go to the Ukrainians backed off of those seized Russian assets across different nations. So there's a little bit of red tape that the Europeans and others want to be able to clear to get that money to the Ukrainians. And just yesterday, the president spoke with Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and committed more assistance to the Ukrainians, some $425 million. And that, of course, is part of that $8 billion or so that the president committed to giving to the Ukrainians in the next couple of months. So clearly, this is a situation where the president will continue to talk about Ukraine, stress the importance of giving Ukraine that aid that it needs as he finishes out his term in office, Juliet.
All right, Willie James Inman, thank you so much. We'll await his comments once he lands. Appreciate your report there. Our monitors now take us to the State Department, where spokesperson Matthew Miller is set to respond to Israel confirming the death of Hamas's top leader. So once he starts speaking, we're going to bring you the latest information. But I do want to send it over to our partners right now that you're seeing here on BBC to listen in what they're talking about and what they're reporting.
Also, what's happening with Hezbollah. This might impact
the Gazan society to understand that really there is nothing to fight anymore for.
But in a way, this was good fortune for Israeli troops, for the IDF, that they almost stumbled upon him. I mean, they must have been searching for him for months and months. We assume he was hiding out in the many tunnels of Gaza, but in a way, they got him in the end through good luck, didn't they?
Yes, but it's very strange. You know, the IDF in Rafah is operating in